Hello everyone, my name is Derek and welcome to the Netflix Knowhow, the review show here to help you stop browsing and start watching. Today we have Godless, a Netflix original Western miniseries about a mysterious man named Roy Good who shows up in a tiny quiet little mining town almost completely populated by women. Little do they know that Roy Good is being hunted by the notorious criminal Frank Griffin and his gang of ruthless thieves, and it's only a matter of time before they track him down and exact their revenge upon all who provide him aid. If that sounds like the most classically Western thing you've heard this side of a cactus wearing a cowboy hat, you'd be darn tootin'. It's really, really Western. Now, I personally have mixed feelings about Westerns, that being, sometimes I like them and sometimes I don't, so as you can see, pretty complex feelings. But if there's one thing I do know, is that you aren't getting anywhere without strong characters and a good story, and on that front, Godless absolutely nails it. Roy Good, played by Jack O'Connell, is literally the poster child for the tortured soul with a heart of gold. He grew up as an orphan and he was discovered by the series' big bad guy Frank Griffin while he was just a boy. He ends up becoming the adoptive son of Frank, and together they end up roaming the countryside and robbing trains and making bank all along the way, but this doesn't end up sitting very well with Roy in the long run. He ends up backstabbing Frank during one of their train robberies and he steals the loot from them, and this is the events that puts the entire story of this show in motion. Roy is a very tragic character, as he is both a victim of circumstances outside of his control and also of his own stubborn personality. He is quiet and outspoken, but also warm and kind-hearted, and he's taking whatever measures are necessary to try and cleanse the crimes of his past so that he can start a new life for himself. But we can't talk about Roy without mentioning Frank Griffin, who is played by the always magnificent beardy Jeff Daniels. Just to be clear, clean-shaven Jeff Daniels is also wonderful and magnificent, but it's important that we know what kind of Jeff Daniels we are talking about here. Frank Griffin is a man of God. Specifically, the kind of man who uses God to justify the murdering of entire towns in order to purge them of their ungodliness. Or if they piss him off somehow, it's a pretty fine line. He is a very interesting character because he's not evil per se. He is a terrible person that does absolutely terrible things, yes, but he's not evil. He's more like a delusional demagogue that genuinely believes he is spreading the good word of the Lord, but he's twisted it and deformed it to fit his agenda so much that by this point it's just become a grotesque abomination of itself. Jeff Daniels does an absolutely phenomenal job with this role, and he brings a sense of calm stoicism mixed with intense intimidation to it. He is just one of those actors that completely disappears into whatever role he is playing, whether it be comedic, dramatic, lighthearted, serious, and this is just another one in a long line of roles for him to add to his already impressive resume. The woman who finds Roy Good in the beginning of the series is named Alice Fletcher, and she's played by English actress Michelle Dockery. Look, you can praise Wonder Woman all you like, and deservedly so, but Alice Fletcher is the epitome of everything that a strong central female character should be. She's tough, she's stubborn, she's perseverant, she's bold, but she's also incredibly vulnerable and very overwhelmed. She is a character that is vehemently independent but also deeply heartbroken. Her relationship with Roy is initially of a symbiotic nature, as she needs him to help break the horses left behind by her late husband, and he needs her to help teach him a skill that most of us already take for granted. I'm not going to say what skill specifically he has to learn because it is such an emotional gut punch when it's revealed, but just know that when you see it, it's really going to put in perspective and make you appreciate the little luxuries that you are lucky enough to have in your life. Their relationship ends up blossoming from something of a mutual agreement of favors with each other to more of a therapeutic healing process for the scars of their past, and it is absolutely beautiful and touching to watch develop. There are also a slew of other side characters, each with their own distinct personalities and charms and different storylines. Scoot McNairy plays aging town sheriff Bill, who is slowly going blind and having to deal with the loss of respect from his community and also the loss of his ability to adequately protect them. Merritt Wever plays the town sheriff's brazen sister Mary, who has essentially taken it upon herself to become the town's
badass mother who don't take no crap of nobody.
Mary is a total bamf and probably my favorite character in the whole show. I just love her blunt attitude and her conviction to her ideals, and she is the kind of character who is not afraid to get right up in somebody's face and tell them exactly how stupid she thinks they are because she is just that awesome and that badass. Whitey is the town deputy and local gunslinger extraordinaire, played by Thomas Brodie-Sangster. I was a little bit worried about this character initially because I know this actor from the Maze Runner films, and he did fine in those movies, but I wasn't really sure how convincing he was going to be in this role. Thankfully, he managed to take all of my doubts and pick them off one by one. Whitey is very much the stereotypical young, arrogant prodigy type, but in a way that's actually very sweet and charming. He represents that sort of youthful naivety that thinks it can take on the world and is invincible, and even in the face of certain death, he always has this big infectious smirk on his face just because he is so happy to be alive. There's also Alice's mother-in-law, played by Tontoo Cardinal, and she is hilarious in a really dry, deadpan kind of way. She's a lot like Mary in the sense that she's a very straightforward, no-nonsense kind of person who doesn't have time for anybody's crap. There's an episode where she goes on a hunting trip with Roy and Alice's son, and it's just so funny because the two guys are constantly having to keep up with this grizzled old mountain lady, and it's very apparent that she is so annoyed that she's been saddled with these two idiots who are just kind of holding her back. Speaking of Alice's son, that brings us to Truckee, played by Samuel Marty. Truckee is kind of a sad character with a bit of an identity crisis because he is a half Native American child who doesn't really have a connection with his heritage because of his father's untimely death. Roy ends up serving as somewhat of a surrogate father to Truckee, and the bond that they develop is very, very touching. I really liked the relationship between the two of them because it's not one that is defined along cultural lines. It's more speaking to this idea of inclusiveness, of this idea that we're all part of a larger singular community and we can all learn things from one another despite the differences that we may have in our histories and our cultures. In regards to theme, the show speaks a lot to this idea of loss and grieving, and it's an idea and a theme that is present in every single character, in every single story, in every shot, and even the town as a whole itself. The backstory to this little town of La Belle, New Mexico is that it was once a flourishing community thanks to the local mine where most of the men worked. Tragically, there was an accident that killed all of the miners, and it left behind all of their widows and their families to fend for themselves. It's never really specified what exactly happened in the mine, whether it was a collapse or maybe some sort of gas leak, but that's not really what's important here. This accident, whatever it was, has cast a permanent shadow over this town and over the people, and you can just feel the pain and the anguish and the grief and the overwhelming power that this tragic accident has over the community and its people. It is a feeling that is present in every single scene, in every single moment, in every action of every character. The most haunting scene by far is a dramatized recount of the morning of the accident. The townspeople all gather outside and they slowly start marching to the entrance of this mine, big smiles on their faces, the sun is shining, but it's underscored by this really dark and ominous music that's just foreshadowing what is going to happen to them in just a brief period of time. The men all end up stepping into the mine shaft, and then it cuts to their perspective where we're looking out at all of their families and their children as they're all waving them goodbye, and then the camera slowly descends down into the mine and into complete darkness. It is an emotionally brutal and tragic scene that even Shakespeare at his gloomiest could not hope to top. The show does a phenomenal job of creating this somber atmosphere that trickles down into every character, and it shows in their struggles with each of their own personal losses. Roy's loss of his family and integrity, Alice's loss of her husband and her security, Frank Griffin's loss of his adoptive son and his status as a respected father figure. Each and every one of these characters has lost something important to them, something that has defined their life and who they are for such a long time, and now they are having to figure out how to struggle with and cope with this hole that has been left behind. Theme is obviously important in any kind of narrative, but Godless stands out above the rest because it weaves its themes of loss and grieving and mourning into every aspect of the show so seamlessly and so well. I'm not going to even try and count the number of engaging and investing individual stories going on in this whole series because there's too many of them to count really, but it never feels like it's too much or that it's overwhelming because they're all so strongly connected by these central themes. It is a somber and beautiful show with some truly inspiring and captivating scenery. One of the best scenes in the entire show is a scene where Roy is working with one of the horses and it just oozes with compassion and beauty and emotional resonance. At its core, it's really just a scene about a man training a horse, but God, the feels, man, the feels. For some, the pacing of the show might be a little too slow and deliberate, as it's all about accentuating those emotional moments and not rushing anything in the process. I personally really liked that it took its time to really nail down those strong emotional beats, but it doesn't have a whole lot of action. So if you're coming into this wanting a lot of, guns blazing, cowboys and, horses ride around, stuff like that, you're not gonna get a whole lot of that here. Also, the finale was underwhelming. I don't necessarily mean that like it's a bad finale, it's just, it kind of highlighted some of the overarching issues with the main plots that weren't really noticeable up until that point. Basically, it just ends up becoming very, very apparent how disconnected the main conflict between Roy Good and Frank Griffin was to everything else that had happened in the show up to that point. Honestly, this may accidentally be the result of all of the characters and their stories being so interesting and captivating that it feels like a bit of a come down to have to come back to the main plot line at the end of it all. I don't know, it just feels like the ending should have been more epic. Not necessarily in terms of action, but more like in terms of ideas and themes. For how complex the characters were and how deep the themes and ideas of the show were overall, it just kind of feels like the ending was a bit too safe and a bit too conventional for its own good. Again, not a bad finale per se, just a bit underwhelming after everything that had happened before it. The final shots though, at the very, very end of it, are nothing but pure eye candy and just emotional high horses all the way through. Godless is honestly one of the best westerns I have seen in a very, very long time, and its focus on strong, complex characters and deeply rooted themes will leave you emotionally drained and elated by the time you finish the last episode.
But Derek, what if I don't like westerns to begin with?
In that case, you're probably not gonna like it. As I said in the beginning, it is a very Western. And so, despite the fact that it has these great characters and these really strong themes, it's not going to be converting anyone to the genre anytime soon. But if you do like westerns or you just like really strong, emotionally resonant narratives, this is one horse that is going to give you a heck of a ride. Even a man of God could put his faith in Godless. Thumbs up. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you. If you enjoyed this content, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below. I try to upload on a regular basis, at least 1 to 2 times a week. You can also head over to Facebook and over to Twitter. Follow me on there. I post updates on occasion. And as always, if you want to know your flicks, you know where to click. Happy hunting, guys. I'll see you next time.